First, to call the meeting to order of June 11th, 2020, the Select Board, Sherborn Select Board, virtually over Zoom. I will have the Town Administrator, David Williams, read the agenda.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. First, you'll amend or approve the agenda. I don't have any amendments. In a period of public comment, and then for a consent agenda, there's payroll warrant and meeting calendar with the next meeting dates of June 25th, July 9th, which is a joint meeting with advisory. The second item is consideration of proclamation for Patricia Cassell. And then the third item is consideration of annual town appointments to various boards and committees. There was an attached sheet that was posted of all the appointments. The fourth item is COVID-19 team update, Board of Health Chair, Fire Chief, Lieutenant Bento, and Sean Killeen from DPW. The fifth item is Heidi Doyle, Library State Grant Award reissuance. Sixth item is consideration of seasonal dock permit for Farm Pond pursuant to GL Chapter 91, Section 10A at 151 Forest Street, Michael Gorman. Number 7 is amended all liquor license Heritage of Sherborn, just signatures. For number 8, 2020 annual town meeting, discussion of annual town meeting forum, consideration of 2020 annual town meeting warrant, FY 2021 budget discussion, consideration of reopening warrant, consideration of purchase of 5 Washington Street. Consideration of administration items and routine business, finance director, consideration of setting a date for a joint meeting with advisory, which is already.
We have a lot of background noise going on. Can people mute themselves, please?
I just muted whoever's 8964.
Okay, thank you.
Okay.
Sorry, David.
Consideration of administration items and routine business with finance director. Consideration of setting a date with joint meeting for advisory. For budget and year-end reserve fund transfers, consideration of expenditure plan for the month of July, consideration of approval to deficit spend, consideration of implementing July 1 salary actions, then town administrator, then select board member reports. And then under executive session, there are 3 items. The first exemption is MGL Chapter 30A, Section 21A, subsection 3. To discuss strategy with respect to threatened potential litigation if an open meeting may have a detrimental effect on the litigation position of the town and the chair so declares. Library. Second item is MGL Chapter 30A, Section 21A, subsection 2, to conduct strategy sessions in preparation for negotiations with non-union personnel, Fire Chief. And the last item is MGL Chapter 30A, Section 21A, subsection 3, to discuss strategy with respect to litigation if an open meeting may have a detrimental effect on the litigating position of the public body and the chair so declares, and subsection 6, to consider the purchase, exchange, lease, or value of real property if the chair declares that an open meeting may have a detrimental effect on the negotiating position of the public body and the chair so declares.
Thank you, David. Do I have a, yes, Paul, I see your hand up.
I'd like to amend the agenda to include a reserve fund transfer for the DPW.
Yeah, that would fall under the finance director's line item.
Oh, so, all right.
I figured we would do those. She's done those before, just under Sharon's line item.
Okay.
Right, Sharon? Oh, you're muted. There you
Yes,
go.
thank you. Yeah,
That works?
I'm prepared to do that. Thank you.
Okay, thank you. All right, so since we're going to do that under that line item, do I have a motion to approve the agenda?
I'll move. So moved.
Okay, so moved by Mr. Yan. I'll do it. Do I have a second? Second by Mr. Waldron. I'll do a roll call vote. Mr. Durensis,
Yes.
Mr. Johnson,
Aye.
Mr. Waldron,
Aye.
Mr. Yan,
Aye.
and I vote aye. So 5-0 for the approval of the agenda. So now getting into the agenda, do we have any public comment? I don't see any hands up. Well, let me get started as I usually do with the Zoom meetings. If you want to be recognized, please go into the chat or raise your hand, or not raise your hand on the screen because I won't necessarily see you if there's multiple pages of people. So raise your hand in the chat or on the Zoom, not on the video. And I'll try to get to everybody
So
in
I don't
order.
know why it's not showing me all the choices at the bottom.
So the next item, if I have no public comment, first item is the consent agenda. Do I have a motion to approve the consent agenda?
So moved.
Second.
All right, so I'll take a roll call vote. Mr. Durensis moved, Mr. Waldron second. So Mr. Durensis,
Votes aye.
Mr. Johnson,
Aye.
Mr. Waldron,
Aye.
Mr. Yan. You're muted, Mr. Yan.
Trying to be a good citizen, aye.
I can read your lips though, so I did see that you said aye. I vote aye, so 5-0. Okay, thank you. The next item is the consideration of proclamation for Pat Casal. Paul, would you like to do this?
Yes, I first move that the proclamation be issued by the board, and I wonder if I can read it aloud.
Please do.
Wait, let me just get it. A proclamation. Whereas Pat Casal has been a resident of the town since 1971. Pat, along with her late husband, Doug, have been members of the Farm Pond Advisory Committee since 2007. Pat also served on the Municipal Building Committee in 1982, the Storm Emergency Committee in 1997, the Reuse 23 Washington Street Committee in 2008, and has been an integral part of the Council on Aging, spending many hours helping with lifelong learning programs. Whereas through the years, the Casals have tirelessly given themselves to serve the town that they both so loved. Whoops, just lost it. Hold on one second. Sadly, in 2017, Doug passed away. A few years later, Pat appeared before the select board with a concept that she had developed for a memorial that would be at Farm Pond. This memorial would be paid for solely by Pat and any donations that she would receive. Whereas on May 9, 2019, the select board gave their blessing to Pat for the final approval to move forward with the construction of the project at Farm Pond that would be dedicated to her late husband, Doug. Now, therefore, we, the select board of the town of Sherborn, on behalf of all the citizens, extend our heartfelt gratitude and appreciation to Pat Casal for her years of dedication to the town and for the memorial lookout at Farm Pond that will be enjoyed by all for many, many years to come. A witness whereof we have caused the seal of the town to be affixed to this proclamation on this 11th day of June in the year 2020. It's signed by George Morrill, Chuck Yan, Eric Johnson, Paul Durensis, and Jeff Waldron. So moved.
Oh, do I have a second?
Second.
Second by Mr. Yan. We'll do a vote. Do we have any discussion? Anybody want to say a few words or?
Sure.
Go ahead.
Thank you. I would, can you hear me?
Yes, we can hear you, Pat. Go ahead.
I'd like to say thank you for allowing me to do this memorial for Doug. He was passionate about Farm Pond and spent many hours working on it, on preserving it. And I think that this area will be nice for disabled people as well as the regular public. And I I want everybody to enjoy this unique spot on Farm Pond for time immemorial. Thank you.
Thank you, Pat. Go ahead, Paul.
I want to say a few words about Doug Cassell. I mean, this memorial, beautiful as it is, it's also a memorial to Doug. I had occasion to work with Doug over many, many years. He was devoted to Farm Pond. He was constantly researching issues and putting together paperwork and analysis of all kinds of aspects of Farm Pond. He created quite a library of materials, a resource to the town. Those materials he prepared themselves are a memorial to Doug Cassell. They will forever be useful to the town whenever we need to know anything about Farm Pond. He was a great citizen of the town. I miss him, and I'm glad that there's a memorial for him.
Thank you, Paul.
Thank you.
Go ahead, Chuck.
Just echo what Paul was saying. Pat approached several of us very early on with this project at Farm Pond, and she's been single-minded and dedicated in getting it done. If you look at the plaques on the wall back behind her, I can't count them all because it extends beyond my field of vision, but they all look like Farm Pond plaques. So I think the town owes a huge debt of gratitude to both of the Cassells, and I'm really pleased that they're being recognized tonight.
Thank you, Chuck. And if anybody can see David Williams' picture, he's changed his background to the overlook that Pat had built, which it looks fantastic. We really, it's a great asset that you've added to the town, Pat. We really do appreciate it.
And kudos to the contractor. I can't remember, Pat, who did it, but it really is. If you go up there and see it, it's just, it's beautifully done.
Eronian Landscape and Design from Holliston created the project.
Good, we'll give them a free plug here tonight, but they did wonderful work.
And David said his father is a selectman in Holliston and wanted to say thank you for allowing them to do the project.
Right.
And Earl Davis created the logo that I used for the flyer that went out in the beginning. I wanted to give him recognition too.
Thank you,
He did
Earl.
a wonderful job.
All right. Well, thank you, everybody who was involved with this. Pat, especially, we really, this is fantastic. So I'll take a vote on the proclamation. Mr. Durensis,
Votes aye.
Mr. Johnson,
Aye.
Mr. Waldron,
Aye.
Mr. Young,
Enthusiastic guy.
and I also vote aye. So 5-0. Thank you so much,
Thanks, Pat.
Pat. This is a fantastic thing you've added to the town, and we really do appreciate all your service, you and Doug, for your years of service to the town.
Thank you.
Can somebody please mute Dorothea?
Thank you.
Thank you. All right, thank you, everybody. The next item on the agenda is consideration of annual town appointments to various boards and committees.
Yeah.
We have a list of sheets. I do want to discuss a few of these because though we have recommendations from the board. I know, Chuck, did you want to say something too? I know you mentioned to me you'd like to say something about appointments. Chuck, are you? Oh, you're muted, Chuck. I can't hear you.
Can I do you? No, you got to do it. It's your controls.
Chuck, you're there. You're on. There you go. Can you start over?
Sorry about that. Yeah, we've talked about this in the past. I just think it's important. Volunteers are so critical to the town, but I think just as a matter of principle, it's a great idea that if we have new members, that we continue to rotate them through to bring new perspectives. I was on the recycling committee for a number of years because we frankly had trouble getting people to serve. But I think it's important as a matter of policy to try to encourage new membership, new perspectives on every appointment. So whenever we are looking at appointments, I'd like to know how many terms somebody has served on the committee. It often is irrelevant because there are only 2 candidates and 2 positions.
Well, but for instance, this year, Chuck, I know on the Conservation Commission, for one, there were 3 applicants and we have 2 recommendations from the Conservation Commission. I mean, we've talked about this before, that it shouldn't be a self-appointing board.
The other member dropped out,
Oh, okay,
so there's only 2.
right. But again, I just wanted to mention the fact that in the past, we had this discussion a couple of years ago that there was a candidate, there was another candidate, and they weren't really considered because the board told us who they wanted on their own board. So I think we really should be looking at this independently as appointments rather than making these boards self-appointing.
Yeah, actually, George, I had a question for Diane and Dave. There was a 3rd applicant for the Conservation Commission. I saw in the memo from the Concom that that individual had withdrawn his application. Is that your understanding, Diane and Dave?
Yes, it's Diane. Yes, that is. I spoke to Allery and she told me he withdrew his application.
Terrific, thank you.
Eric?
Did the applicant withdraw after the conservation made their recommendations or before?
She let me know the day after the meeting that he had withdrawn his application. So I really honestly can't answer that.
Courtney, if you could, I see Courtney waving her hand. If you could unmute Courtney Eck. I know she's on the Conservation Commission.
He's ready.
I know. You get her?
Hi, sorry.
Hi, Courtney.
Yes, the applicant, the 3rd person who wanted to be on the commission, he withdrew. He was invited to come speak to the commission, but withdrew. So then the board just decided to support the two re-ups, as it were.
Okay, thank you for that clarification, Courtney.
Yep.
Now, there was another one, I think the COA, I was confused how many applicants there were for the COA in our packet. Can you guys clarify that? Because it seemed there were 2 positions, or more than that. I think there was 3 positions, but then or 4 positions, but there were like 5 applicants or something like that.
Yes,
But then I didn't see a fifth
there were,
applicant.
I believe there were 5 applicants. I'm going to pull that out. If
Sue
you don't-
Kelleher's right here.
Yeah, Sue's on the line.
Sue.
Oh, she just muted herself. There you go, Sue. Oh,
Okay,
okay, Sue's, there we go. Go
okay.
ahead.
So there were 5 applicants. There were 4 seats open and we had 5 applicants. And we had 2 new people that have recently expressed an interest in getting involved. And then 2 people that were on as an associate member. And then 1 person that's been a longtime board member. So yep.
How many board members are there?
So that with this appointment, there'll be 9. We needed an odd number.
And how many associate members?
5.
But how many of those associate members are select board appointed as associate?
The associates aren't, they're appointed by the board.
Right.
And then just the board members are appointed by the selectmen.
So the board can appoint as many associates as it wants.
Yeah, because they don't vote.
And I think you've done a good job in reducing the number, because didn't we have like 15 associates?
Yeah, there used to be a lot.
Okay, good job. Thanks.
So I'm looking at this and it says you had 5 applicants.
Yep.
Which were, but all I see is the 4 names that you're recommending. Who was the 5th applicant?
She's an associate. They put her as an associate, Carol D'Souza.
And
Okay.
Sue, how many, 3 of the 4 reappointments, Sally Tipton.
So one of them is a reappointment. Tricia Caldicott's a reappointment. Then the Sarah Tipton and Ken Adams were associate members that applied to be on the board because we had 2 people get off the board.
So they're appointments to be a member, not as a associate. How many, can you just walk me through how many terms Sally, Ken, and Tricia have been on either the board or as an associate member?
I'm not sure because this was new to me. So I think Tricia's been on the board for several years. And then Sally was on the board, but she had an illness, so she got off the board and became an associate member and wants to come back on. And then Ken, I think he's been an associate for a long time.
And Lori Howe is a new member, is she not?
So Lori and Carol were the 2 new people that applied to be on the board.
Right.
I just think, as Chuck said, and I think we as a board need to start, I mean, we get these recommendations from the actual board. I think we should be the ones actually considering who's the appointment, not the board self-appointing.
It was very confusing. Well, this was my first time doing this process, so it was very confusing to me how the whole thing worked. So
I think the past practice has been that we send everything to the board or committee, and they interview people and then make a recommendation, and then the select board, the final say on who should be appointed.
Yeah, but I think maybe that's backwards. That's my point.
Okay.
I think it's that we should be the ones considering who should be appointed to these boards rather than them, because the way we have it now, they're really self-appointing who they want on their board with.
You're right, absolutely.
Well, their
Yeah.
actions are not binding on us.
What's that?
The actions of the various boards and committees aren't binding on us. We can do whatever we want.
Oh, I know that, but I'm just
But-
saying, like, by the time it gets to us, they've already decided who they want, and we're supposed to just rubber stamp it, and I don't like that process.
But one advantage they have over us is that a lot of these associate members, they've worked with them for years. They know who actually rolls up their sleeves and does the work, and who actually comes to meetings and puts in the effort, and who doesn't. I mean, they're in a much better position to give advice, and it's only advice.
But you also want some diversity on these boards. I mean, I think some of our boards have become all of the same opinion when you let them self-appoint. And I think I've had complaints about a few of the boards in town because they have a singular opinion.
Well, I like to honor people who are willing to volunteer for the town and put in the hours, go to these endless meetings. That's not somebody I want to turn away, even if they've been there for a while. This town is built on volunteers. We should honor them and respect that.
Well, I think but I don't think that's the point, Paul. This only applies when we have more applicants than there are slots. A lot of the committees, we don't even have enough applicants for all the slots, but this is only relevant. Several years ago, there was a proposal to require qualifications for election to one of the elected boards. And I was very concerned about it because I shared George's view that none of these committees, and certainly not elected committees, should be self-perpetuating. We need diversity, we need new views, and frankly, the volunteers, there's a real value in them moving on to a different committee, bringing their perspective. Eric Johnson's a good select board member, only because he was on the planning board. Sorry, Eric.
I wouldn't say only, but.
Only because I was with Chuck, so I learned.
Well, and it's the same, Jeff and I have come from advisory and end up, I think you get perspective by going from different board to board. And I think boards are stronger when they have a diversity. I mean, we don't all agree on everything. And to be quite blunt, I'm going to call out the Conservation Commission on this because I've had a lot of complaints about the Conservation Commission and the fact that they can be, we've had a recent complaint. All of you got the same letter that I did, that sometimes we need to consider who we're appointing to these boards.
Yeah, I think George's proposal makes sense of having it go the other direction, but I could see having the boards make a recommendation to us, but not causing candidates to withdraw. In other words, have all the candidates come to us, allow the board to make a recommendation to Paul's point, but we're the ones making the decision, and we can look at the full slate of candidates, the recommended ones and the other ones. And I think there's a balance. I like Chuck's idea of getting new blood, but there's some areas like the Board of Health or Conservation where technical expertise, if you're a medical doctor or a water hydrologist or something, we have to balance the functional expertise, just like advisory tends to get a few more finance people.
Right. No, absolutely. But I think we could, as a board, we're the ones in charge of appointing those boards. So we should be the ones reviewing the resumes before the boards are self-appointing. Maybe because people do have opinions on these boards and they might choose to appoint people that have similar opinions to them. Eric, go ahead. I saw your hand up.
Yeah, and actually, Jeff literally stole what I was going to say. And I agree with Jeff. There has to be some way. It's not unreasonable to have a board screen and go through the background and make a recommendation. But we have to keep people from dropping out and then allow us to vet it. So it's only each time, like here's the whole wave of them. So this year we've had 2 that are kind of not, more applicants and spots. I think the select board does have to look at those resumes in kind of greater scrutiny and be satisfied that we're making that decision. It's been such a long history of the boards making a recommendation. I hate to throw that out the window. I don't know if you guys remember a few years ago, the ZBA made a recommendation. The select board went against it and the entire ZBA walked off because they felt strongly about it. Not saying it's right or wrong, but it's an example of a certain precedent there where a certain board felt that the appointee was being politicized rather than being vetted on skill set. So I think there has to be a balance. And I think the select board has to have a good reason, to go against the recommendation, but certainly allowed to. I mean, you're right. We can't just rubber stamp these. We absolutely can't just look at them. We have to look at the resumes, particularly maybe create a protocol. If there's any case where there's more applicants than positions, then that board's obligated to provide contact information and resumes. So we can look at it ahead of time before the meeting and make our own opinions and reach out to the candidates if we want, and even request an interview if we want. I think it has to be some balance like that. I'd hate to throw out the long precedent of a board making a recommendation. You know what I mean?
I think Renee Montella wants to say something.
Oh, please do.
Trying to find her.
Well, I think in our situation, it's a little bit, can you hear me?
Yes, we can hear you, Renee.
Because we have an advisory, or our COA is an advisory board. So
supervisory.
So they are making the recommendations, which is a little bit different than the other boards where, the people are voting in and, we report to them. We do not report to the town administrator. So we don't have a lot of say in who our board members might be.
Right, but the board my point is that your board is appointed by the selectmen. So the selectmen, our duty is to review the resumes of people who are applying and pick who we think is the best candidate. And part of that is taking a recommendation from the COA or from the different boards, but we also should have a chance to vet these people before we make the appointments if there's more candidates than there are slots.
Exactly, and I think you should investigate that a little bit more. So I'm in agreement with that.
Thank you. Chuck, go ahead. I saw your hand up.
Yeah, no, I think Jeff and Eric got it exactly right. I'm not suggesting we don't give recommendations. It's just where we've got more candidates than there are slots. At that point, I think we have a duty to take a look at it. And I don't want any committee to be self-perpetuating. Elected boards are a little different. Some of us have been elected again and again and again. God bless the voters. But particularly where we're appointing people, I think it's our duty to take a look at that and to look for advisory. Historically, has done a great job at having broad, different perspectives.
Well, advisory also has the 2-term limit, so people can only serve 2 consecutive terms on advisory, and they're done. Which I think is a great way for, especially on committee as important as advisory that it turns over. Paul, go ahead. I saw your hand up. I'm sorry.
I was just going to say that with regard to the Council on Aging, what I care most about is that the members care for our seniors. And to me, that's a big difference than appointing the Board of Appeals, where we just appointed a very smart lawyer to the Board of Appeals. The Board of Appeals makes decisions, issues permits, handles 40Bs, has tremendous responsibility. But the Council on Aging is caring for our seniors. So I don't see that we're looking for a high-powered lawyer to be on the Council on Aging. I think we're looking for people who care, who want to help, who want to make life better for our seniors. So it's not I don't see it as political. I don't see it as a question of getting diverse views. I would want to see everybody having the same view of caring for people. If we put somebody on there who felt people shouldn't be cared of because we want diversity,
right,
what purpose is served by that?
Yeah, well, I think, I mean, on any board, you want a little bit of a diversity of opinion. I was more referring to the Conservation Commission in the fact that if you have all environmental scientists and no engineers, I think an engineer or a real estate professional actually serves a purpose of bringing a different perspective to something like the Conservation Commission.
Plus, I think everybody on the board of the COA does care, but people bring different experiences too, and expertise, like grant writing or
Right.
working in a larger nonprofit that can help you do strategy and things like that. So it's not that if you're going to be on the COA board, you definitely care about older people. So
Right.
I just think it's more of a diversity in terms of experience and skill set.
And as we all know, every board is served well to have an attorney, but not too many attorneys.
Touche.
Is that a motion, sir?
I see Daryl Beardsley has her hand up. If somebody could unmute Daryl.
Yep, I've been unmuted. So you hear me?
Yes,
Oh.
Go ahead, Daryl.
Just to offer another angle on this, not to negate anything else that anyone has said, but when you're talking about regulatory, first let me say, if people have been to CONCOM meetings, I don't think there's always agreement there, and there's a lot of debate that goes on, just for your information. The other is for a regulatory board, sometimes it looks like everyone's in unison because they understand the regulations and how to apply it. And so from someone who is not getting what they want, it may seem like that there's nothing backing up those decisions, and that may not be the case at all. So just another input.
Well, thank you, Daryl. All right, so we have a list of candidates for appointment. Do we have any other discussion, or do I have a motion to make these appointments?
So moved.
Second.
Okay, moved by Mr. Durenz. Eric, go ahead.
So I'm just looking at the Council of Aging, and apparently the board members nominate the associate members, even though they're listed down here, the associate members in their memo. We are only voting for the actual council members, not the associate members. Is that correct?
Correct.
Okay, because one of the proposed associate members was the one person who wasn't selected to be a member. I'd like to at least encourage that continued involvement.
Okay. Thank you, Eric. So I have a motion and a second, so we'll take a roll call vote. Mr. Durensis?
Yes.
Mr. Johnson?
Aye.
Mr. Waldron?
Aye.
Mr. Yan?
Aye.
And I also vote aye. Thank you. I think it's important that we have we had a list of candidates to discuss, but I really do think it's an important thing that we discuss the way we do appointments in town.
Just a point of order.
Yes.
Under the Town Forest Committee,
Yes.
it says there was one applicant to fill one vacancy. David Colleen is recommending the select board consider appointing, and then there are two names.
Yeah, Paul, in the process of putting this all together, there was a resignation. Somebody resigned. Peg Robinson decided not to be appointed again.
So there are two vacancies.
So then there became two, right?
Okay, thank you. I withdraw the point of order.
All right. Thank you. So we'll move on to our next agenda item, which is an update from our COVID-19 team. Daryl, you might as well stay unmuted, so I'll let you take the lead here, and or Zach or Lieutenant Bendo, with whoever. Go ahead.
Yeah, so I'm actually going to kick off the conversation. Just for those who may be watching who aren't aware, but the town created a COVID-19 work group in early February, I believe. And this work group consists of members of the Select Board, the Board of Health, Emergency Management, Fire, Police, DPW, Finance, the COA, the library, and representatives from the schools, okay? And this group continues to meet at least once per week to discuss this pandemic that we're in and to ensure that the town is appropriately responding to it. We also currently, as a group, participate in up to 20 weekly calls with various agencies. So for instance, Ellen Hartnett, the Board of Health Administrator, is on several calls per day usually. And, for instance, I'm on several calls per week with different emergency management agencies and so on. Several of our team members also meet with Dover twice per week to collaborate on certain issues, and many of those revolve around the school. And just to kind of give you an idea of what some of our current focuses are, so our number one project right now is to support the town with reopening and to ensure that we're doing it as safe as possible. So that's kind of our top priority. And closely behind that are reimbursements. So primarily Sharon and myself are working to ensure that the town recoups every dollar that we possibly can through both FEMA and through the CARES Act. Some of our next items that we're going to be working on as a group are an after action survey. So as things continue to cool down, we're going to evaluate ourselves on how we've done. And a big part of that is to prepare for a potential second wave, which, as you know, and may know, several experts are predicting. So we're going to do everything that we possibly can to get ready. Some of the other things that we continually work on are ensuring that public safety departments and certain town offices and other employees have the necessary PPE or personal protective equipment. So luckily, as a town, we are doing very well on PPE. And as this board knows, we participated in a large N95 mask order a couple months ago. And that order really helped us and a lot of our neighbors, and it's still helping us. So luckily, again, as a town, we are very well stocked in many areas. And just before I turn it over to Daryl, I just want to give the board an idea of some of the impact that this is on public safety, just some basic numbers. So without getting too specific, Sherborn Police and Fire have responded to confirmed COVID cases, both in town and through mutual aid. And I just think it's important to point out that both police and fire collectively have we've had 9 public safety members tested for the coronavirus, either due to exposure on the job or off. And luckily, because we got organized quickly as a town in public safety, both police and fire have wonderful policies in place and effective policies. Luckily, none of our members have tested positive. And that's something that we're very fortunate of. And Many other towns have not had that same, call it luck or success. So although we haven't had any positive cases in public safety, there certainly has been an impact. And it's impacting the way that we respond to calls every day, whether it's a fire call or the police department's handling a police matter. It is impacting the way that we operate. I just wanted to give you that little insight before I turn it over to Daryl. Is Daryl on?
Yep,
Yeah.
I'm here.
Go ahead, Daryl.
Okay, ready? Any questions for Zach, or you want me to keep going?
Just keep going.
Okay, so just to follow on a little bit of what Zach had to say, we've had 13 cases in Sherborn, which sounds like very little, but just so people can put it into context, only about 3.5% of our population has even had a test. So, and we are in really one of the hot spots of the world, frankly. And there's 25,000 plus cases in Middlesex County and 10 to 15 in other surrounding counties. So we should not think that we are immune somehow, especially as people move around more and more. We are fortunate we have a lot of space here, and that's one of the key things in terms of protection. So early on, certainly one of the big concerns was our vulnerable populations in town. And the stay at home took care of a lot of that, but that continues to be something that's very important to us. We did meet with Woodhaven last weekend to find out what their concerns were, how things were going, other ways that we could help, that sort of thing. So that was good. Also, and we've been communicating with them in various means, but this was an in-person meeting. We divided up really the population that was there into smaller meetings so that people could be distanced, but not so far away from us as we all talked. And everybody wore masks. That was great. So the other thing that we had been concerned about early on, aside from setting up systems within town, was just how was Sherborn pitching in to help with the issue of flattening the curve, keeping our medical systems from being overwhelmed so that somebody gets appendicitis, they still get to go to the hospital and be taken care of, versus some poor doctor having to make some decision about which patients to treat and which ones not to treat. So we did that. Big concern for me, what's on the horizon, is what's going to happen with our schools and the students in those schools. And I see the school situation as probably the hardest situation that we wrestle with. And we're wrestling with events and incidents and do's and don'ts for all sorts of activities around the town. And I do really love that, even though the Department of Public Health has designated the local boards of health as their arms for enforcement and carrying things out, that we have a team in town where we can collaboratively work on these things and try to come up with practical ways to get things done. So we don't start out saying no to things, we start out with how can we do X in a safe manner. So in terms of the schools though, and this will dip a little bit into a philosophical question that I doubt we can answer tonight, but just to put it in your heads is, again, I think that's a really hard situation. I think these kids could be having their educational experience severely impacted for a year or two. And I'm concerned about how we as a town all pull together to do the best that we can do for whatever measures will help slow this down and enable us to resume as many things as we like and enjoy and are necessary, and especially the education, and how we participate in that, and what expectations we have, and also what interests we have in trying to make that an explicit goal of our behavior in town. So I would love to get your input on, generally, are you in agreement with safety measures or not? Do you think they're overblown, or are they worth it? How onerous are they? Those are
Daryl,
things
I'm
that
glad
we
you
are
brought up-
wrestling with constantly. So,
Daryl, I'm glad you brought up the schools, because one concern I have as a parent, strictly as a parent, not even as so much as a select board member, is the mental health of kids. If they're constantly stranded at home, how does that? I know this is a general question for probably the Department of Public Health and everything. Like, how is it affected if they're constantly at home and not having the social interaction? I think that's such a huge part of schooling, and it's not just the physical health, it's the mental health.
right. And
If it's okay, this is Matt on Board of
oh,
Health.
yes,
Also,
absolutely.
I am working with the school nurses as well as Board of Health from Dover on the task force that Dr. Keogh has assembled. So we're one of the subcommittees with the Health and Hygiene Subcommittee that's sort of looking at some of those issues with a particular focus on implementing the state's guidance on the recommendations that have been made thus far in terms of PPE guidance and those pieces. There's another set of guidance that'll come out sometime next week in terms of what does the fall look like, what things are possible over the summer, which is likely significantly more limited. So I think that that's one of the topics that's a piece of the consideration. I think the other big piece, going back to Daryl's point, is that the quarantine requirements are something that when we were looking at the front end of this in March, were part of what we kind of discussed in terms of policy. But as we go live in the school year, one of the pieces to be aware of just in terms of the impact is that lots of the things that kids typically have that typically are not taken very seriously because they're typically very mild could pose significant health risks to staff or other students. And so figuring out how do we create a system where we have expedient testing, and then also to prepare families where if a household member has COVID, that would typically result in the child being out of school for several weeks in terms of the parents' isolation and the students' quarantine, and then figuring out what the curricular impacts are.
Right. Well, and I also assume there's going to be some mix of online learning and in-class learning. There's some kids who are immunosuppressed or have issues where it might not be safe for them to be at school. So I assume there's got to be some consideration for a mix as well. So, Paul, sorry, I saw your hand up. Go ahead.
Well, I had a question for Daryl, because I understand the statistics when you say 13 in Sherborn. These cases are listed by where people reside. They're not listed by where they work. So when we say that there's 13 cases in Sherborn, you're talking about 13 people who reside in Sherborn, but who may work in Boston or Somerville or elsewhere. Similarly, there could be people from other communities who work in Sherborn who have COVID-19 and are exposed to people in Sherborn, but if they don't live in town, they don't get listed as being a Sherborn incident. So the statistics only reflect where people live.
Yes.
To add to that,
And
Paul,
part
we all
of my-
grocery shop in other towns as well. So we're all
Yes.
intermingling with everybody in all the surrounding towns.
Yes, so
Yes.
my point is more that we're in a hot spot of the world. So I don't want people to be misled by the low number and think that everything's just fine and that there's no risk of a surge again or anything else. So it's, think of we're not in a bubble and we're not isolated in the town. So.
Oh, I just want to answer one part of that question. So if someone is a positive, they're in the state database, the MAVEN database. So they're doing contact tracing on that person, which we're doing contact tracing on, we meaning our Visiting Nurse Association. So they're doing if someone works somewhere else and is a positive but lives in Sherborn, or vice versa, works in Sherborn and lives somewhere else, they're being traced, as are their contacts.
Good.
So in some ways it doesn't matter where they live, because they're part of a statewide system where they do contact, they advise the positive patient to isolate and all their contacts to self-quarantine.
So going back to my basic concern around the schools is, will our behavior reflect that there is still a risk, and what can we do to try to reduce that, if that even makes sense? And Matt, I don't know if what you're hearing out in the medical community as a board and as the COVID work group, we certainly try to keep up on what's being learned and what are the new perspectives, different ideas about it, to try and help that influence how we are making decisions in rational, hopefully intelligent, as best informed as we can be manner. But I guess here's a simple view. My dream would be if someone told me all it would take is that I wear a mask all the time when I am anywhere near people, and certainly within a building, for the next year and a half, and kids could continue their education more easily, I would do that without blinking an eye. So, can we get to some point where we can just, if we find out what those good behaviors are that are effective, and certainly there's a lot of information, at least what we've been hearing about masks maybe really helping a lot. Can we just stick to that? And will we all do that to help our kids, if nothing else?
Chuck, go ahead.
I just want, Daryl, you asked what this select board's view is on whether or not we're striking the right balance in these conflicting interests. Jeff and I have both been active in the committee, so you know our views, but I obviously encourage Eric and Daryl and George and Paul to indicate if they have a different view, but I think that the group has done a very good job of balancing safety, fire, police, protection issues. And I also wanted to say that I think the Board of Health has borne some unfair criticism. This is a cross-functional team including the schools, weighing some really difficult issues. And I've seen some postings on social media that were frankly offensive, criticizing the Board of Health. It's not just the Board of Health. You all are taking the lead, far more about the medical and scientific issues than certainly I, and I think other members on the committee does. But I just wanted to say, I really think that the criticism of the Board of Health being overly cautious is unfair, but I also acknowledge my bias because Jeff and I have been involved in those discussions.
So thank you for that. And I'll say part of why I'm asking is I'm trying to gauge as things are starting to reopen up, and how far do we go with, returning to normal, how fast, and what's that going to do? And maybe we'll learn and we'll have a surge, but I feel if we keep bouncing back and forth between stay at home and opening up, that'll be a mess for things, certainly the continuity of education. So I'm trying to get a feel of, what are your perspectives? We still have our duties to protect the public health. That really is our main function as the Board of Health. So we do have to balance things, and we're trying to do that. And I think the multidisciplinary team is key to that, and it helps. And I love the discussions that we've had with people, and they've been productive in opening up tennis courts and other things. And the farm pond, the team working on that is doing a great job. And it's not simple. The list of questions is astoundingly complex. So, but it would be good to know in general, where does the leadership of the town stand on the efforts?
Well, I really feel on my end, I really do defer to this COVID team because you guys are the experts. I'm not. I don't know anything about public health. I'll be the first one to admit it. So I look to you as the experts to tell us what is right for our towns and our citizens. One thing you did bring up, and I would like an update just because this is the question I get most often, is the update on Farm Pond. I think that's something that everybody wants to know. As a open air, like, I guess the difference between, I know being in a building is a lot different than being out in the open air. So where do you stand on Farm Pond reopening, and how do you make that decision?
Okay, so it's at this point, it's not so much a Board of Health or even a COVID team decision, but there, as I think I've mentioned before, there were over 20 people involved with planning around how to reopen Farm Pond according to the rules that were established at the state level. And it sounds simple, but it is not. In fact, Chelmsford this past weekend closed their beach because, and they have a pond as well, and because things weren't working at all for safety for anyone. So there's a group, certainly Jeannie is leading the charge, and Doug McDougall and all the Farm Pond staff have been involved in mapping out areas where people can sit so that there's physical markings. People don't have to show up at the beach and try and figure out how far away is far enough and who else is going to come and how do we efficiently use the space available. That's all going to be marked off. I know they're wrestling with issues of, do you have a reservation system so that you don't show up there and all the spaces are already gone on the beach? Staff is getting trained on how to deal with issues as they come up there and what to look for without compromising their main job, which is to be lifeguards and protect or have the water safety aspect. So I believe that their current expectation is that they will have everything ready so that at the next Board of Health meeting, which is next Wednesday, we can review things and vote to approve what they've set up. So, but people are putting in an amazing amount of time. And again, if anyone wants to come, join in, help on anything and participate, we would welcome more volunteers because it's more work than you would ever expect. My favorite saying, the devil is in the details when you try to implement it.
Eric, go ahead.
Yep. I just have two, I think it'll be quick questions about the operation of Town Hall. Are people still doing a partial work at home thing? So we're having only a partial occupancy of the offices right now? And are we setting them up to be able to work at home?
Yes, everyone was set up to work at home from the beginning. Slowly, a few have been spending more time in here, but it's limited to probably 4 or 5 people. And we have been not letting people into the office. They've had to work out the time that they're going to be in the office with other people that work in that office. So it's been alternate schedules.
Okay.
But
That's very similar. Oh, sorry.
I was just going to say that's been going well.
No, that's very similar to actually what we're implementing in my day job, where you actually will stagger them throughout the week. But something, and are they okay with, they're showing as letter A here in under the Board of Health memo. I think that makes sense for schools, but we can have kind of a controlled work environment. Are they responding well to having to wear masks throughout the full day, even when unless they're in an enclosed office? I know that's something that we're executing, is that everyone has a defined workspace. And in your defined workspace, you don't have to wear your mask. But as soon as you leave that defined workspace, then you actually have to wear your mask.
Yeah.
But that's in the memo here, it says that, you have to wear it unless you're in an enclosed office by yourself.
We have, as you know how Town Hall is set up, basically all the offices are behind a door. So it's just the common area where people would be putting a mask on if they're going from office to office or to the copier room. Some have chosen to just keep the mask on all the time while they're in their office, even if they're the only person in there. But definitely people understand once they come into the building or as soon as they come into the building, they got to have a mask on and walk through the building with a mask on to get to their office.
And that makes sense, but it's not how, I should say, letter B in the memo is actually worded. It says you have to be the only person in an isolated office to take your mask off.
Yes, and I guess I can explain the reason for that. And if you go to the Science Tidbits tab on the town website, there is some more technical information posted about this. The virus is believed to build up in indoor spaces. So not all of the dynamic associated with what can be exhaled is related to gravity pulling it down onto the ground. So that's that 6 foot separation. That's the principle that's led to that 6 foot number. But the virus is really small. It can attach to little dust. There are other dynamics. I'm not going to go into that here, but there are other dynamics that can keep it suspended in the air. So if there's somebody infected or more than one person infected, the more they're exhaling into the space, that can build up there unless you have really fantastic air exchange systems and turnovers of the air in the room. And also, even at that, if it's still moving past someone, they may still be exposed to a lot. There are just too many dynamics to consider, and we felt it was safer for people involved. If you're going to be 2 people in an office, or 3 people, or whatever it is, that wearing a mask was the preferred route.
And that makes sense. I mean, I've seen modeling where basically it's, and bottom line with the modeling, it means don't stand between an air intake and anyone else. But my only point being, it doesn't sound like that's what's being executed. And I urge that, you know, particularly it depends how much you're rotating people through, it might not be realistic. If you have like 2 people in a very large office, treasurer collector's office, and you're 15 feet apart, to expect someone to wear it 8 hours a day just might not be a realistic expectation. That's kind of what I'm saying. I do think, like I said, how we've defined it where I work, you have a defined workspace. In that defined workspace, you're allowed some flexibility. As soon as you leave that, which means getting out of your chair, as soon as you leave that, it is expected that you wear it. Whether it's ideal or not, but I just think for the person sitting at the desk for 8 hours, it just might not be a realistic, and it sounds like it's not happening, because it's one of those things where you have to you can make a conservative recommendation, but be realistic of human nature as well, and what's actually going to happen. That's all I'm saying.
David?
We only have one office really that, 1 or 2 offices that's affecting, where there's more than one person coming in and working at the same time. But when you say workspace, Eric, are you talking about like a cubicle, or are the walls all the way to the ceiling?
It's basically your chair. So if you're in a cubicle, or you're in, let's say, even an open desk, as soon as you get out of your chair, you put on your mask. Pure and simple.
I don't think that qualifies either. I mean,
I think Matt's
Dr. Vitale, go ahead.
Yeah, what I would say is I think there's a couple of pieces. I would say my general advice is this is all a balance, and I think this goes back to George's earlier point about how do we balance the needs of kids for social contact and safety, and I think this is similar. I think we also have to ask ourselves, as the people who define what is expected in the workplace, if one person says, no, I'm 7 feet away from you, it's totally fine that I'm not wearing a mask, and the other person in that shared office space says, boy, that makes me deeply uncomfortable, I think we owe it to say, this is a reasonable balance of risk and safety. I think if folks have health conditions or other things that preclude them from doing that, I get it. Like, I spend 12 to 14 hours a day in a mask. I don't find it comfortable, but I do it without complaint. I think that kind of picking a workspace to say this cubicle is here and 1 foot away from it is totally different also has issues with compliance that I worry about. So my advice would be to keep the rule simple and to minimize the degree to which people are in a shared office space and wearing the mask for 8 hours at a time.
Thank you. I want to go back to, I understand the concept of this inside the building at Town Hall. But just based on some stuff I've read, I know Marion Nutra had sent us an article, like when you're outside, so we're talking about Farm Pond again, like, or the playground, because I've heard a lot of people sending me emails about that. Like, how much, I guess, are we being overly, my question is, are we being overly cautious when people are able to space themselves outdoors where they're not in direct contact?
I think in those cases, we're really not. I think one of the important points that never comes across in Nextdoor is in that space, we're essentially following state guidance. So the state says you should wear a mask if you can't ensure 6 feet of separation. I have a 5-year-old. I cannot ensure 6 feet of separation from him from fire, let alone other kids. And so if we're saying at the playground, you don't need to wear a mask because I'll keep my kid 6 feet from your kid's just way better than my kid because I couldn't do it. And I think a similar concern applies at Farm Pond. I have almost no concern about the squads of people I see bicycling through as it's a group of middle-aged adults or families walking on the street with their dog. That's not where I see risk, but in places where we're assembling children, the idea that we don't need to do it because we'll keep them 6 feet away from each other seems generally unrealistic, and I think then reverts to the state guidance on the topic.
George, when we were doing Farm Pond before, Jeannie had her hand raised, and she's been leading in that effort.
Jeannie, go ahead. I think she's muted, so if somebody could unmute her.
Yeah, I can't. She
needs to.
Oh, there you go. Go ahead, Jeannie.
All I wanted to do is say that with Farm Pond that we're hoping to open Friday the 19th. We have utilized Recreation's website so people can go on and make reservations when we're ready to go. We have, I believe, 18 grids that are at the pond right now. They're going to be put up before next Wednesday. So the staff, the 2 waterfront directors we've hired are phenomenal. They are on top of everything. They have their training on Sunday with the staff, and Josh Buckler is going to come down and help with general CPR, COVID, how to help somebody with the COVID situation. So I think we're going to be good.
Thanks, Jeannie.
And I'd like to remind everybody, again, since Farm Pond is such a hot topic and frankly, there are a lot of complaints, without fully appreciating everything that's involved. But keep in mind, we're a small town, a lot of volunteers, small staff, working around the clock on this. There are larger towns who are not able to pull this off. So I think we're doing really well. I mean, Jeannie and her team have been phenomenal on just getting out there and doing it and trying and checking all the boxes. So
absolutely. No, I don't take any of my questions as criticism, please. I'm just trying to get, because everybody's asking me these questions, I want to be able to have answers if somebody does ask me a question.
No, and I know people want to get out there, but again, it goes back to that issue of, do we want to surge? Do we want to keep flip-flopping back and forth, surge and stay at home? It's not my ideal.
No.
George?
Yeah, go ahead, David.
I just want to tell people to go to the town website for the most current information, because that's where it's going to be, not in Talking or any other website of people chatting. The town website will have the most current facts about Farm Pond.
Okay, thank you. Paul, go ahead.
Since the question was, what does the board feel about the balance? My feeling is that given the population of our town, I think we want to err on the side of saving lives and being cautious than going the route of taking risks. I think every town is different, but my sense of this town is that there's a lot of vulnerable people in this town with health issues or seniority and all those things. I come down on the side of caution and safety first. Let's save lives first, would be my motto.
Thanks, Paul. Anything else on this topic before we have more things?
I would like to ask a question. It's
Yeah,
Renee.
go ahead, Renee.
Renee, this is probably for the Board of Health. So, you know, we're trying to stick with the guidelines, 10 people or less. And, but I also wonder if that has to do with the space provided. So for instance, we are planning a garden gathering and we wanted to adhere to the regulations. So it was 10 people or less, but there's 3 of us that just work for the COA. So that's 3 people. And then the 2 people hosting the garden party, that's another 2 people. And we are talking about a garden party that is on like 100 acres. So this is for the COA and to have seniors come and walk through the gardens. And I feel like we're turning people away that have been so isolated for so long. And I'm just wondering what your take is on that. And if it's reasonable within a certain space to allow more than 10 people.
Okay, so this is the 2-part, and also I would want to have extra clarification from Ellen because I think this just came out today. So we've been curious about that as well, but the state had said that no more than 10 people in a gathering, no matter where, but that seems to have been revised today to as long as you're outside in an unconfined space and maintaining distancing, that you can have more than 10. So that is a very big change. So I will double check that.
Okay.
I read it once. That's all the time I had just before this meeting, frankly. So we can get back to you on that and confirm that, because that will make your planning easier. And
one other
remind
comment,
people
Cheryl?
to stay apart, and wearing a mask even outdoors might make it easier too.
Oh, absolutely. No, we put an email that you have to wear the mask, and you know, we're setting restrictions, but I hate to turn maybe 2 people away for, you know,
Right.
property that is hundreds of acres in Sherborn. So it just
No,
doesn't.
we understand that. And again,
Daryl, can I just make a comment because this came up with the school?
Yes.
So I think that it's also like what makes a group. So for example, in the opening of schools and summer programs, you could have a preschool that is multiple groups of children, so long as there's adequate spacing and dividing the space. So in the example you described, if you say, hey, we've got 12 COA members, we've got 2 staff, we've got homeowners, breaking those into smaller groups for the tour so that you don't have 15 or 20 people in close proximity, can be 2 groups of 10 doing a similar activity on a similar property and still be compliant, even if the regulation changes that Doyle described don't apply. So I think thinking creatively about how do you deliver the service, I think there is a concern that, you know, in Boston, the prevalence for acute infection was 2.5%. So there's a threshold that you say, somebody in this group is going to have it, and how many people do we want to expose to it? And I think that's the point the regulations are trying to address.
Is there on those regulations, Dr. Vitale, like the comparison of indoor versus outdoor? I know like schools and daycares are indoor facilities versus, as Renee's saying, they're going to be outside on a huge property. I feel like it, and air disperses much quicker from the, like I said, the article that I read.
I mean, I think that's, again, I think for us, there's a piece where sometimes government regulations don't make perfect sense. And so we may still be faced with guidance from the state that would say, from a fact basis, we might not reach the same conclusion the state did, but we still need to sort of enforce and abide by it. I think for what you're describing, George, it certainly makes sense to me. And I think there's meaningful differences between indoor and outdoor space in terms of dispersal, UV, proximity, you know, kind of the way that the aerosols disperse. But I think going back to Renee's point, what I'm intending to communicate, I think there are multiple ways to skin this cat. I think that hopefully the state regulations have adjusted to reflect that difference in risk, which would be the easiest. But even if not, I think there's still ways to serve our isolated seniors in a way that's safe for them and compliant with the regulations by thinking creatively about it, even if we're stuck with rules that we may not agree with it as an individual.
Thank
And
you.
actually,
Chuck, I
I'll
think-
echo that.
Sorry, Daryl, just a second. Chuck had his hand up a while ago. I just wanted to see.
Dr. Vitale and Daryl both making the point that I wanted to make, which is there's a limit. There's some state guidelines here which we have to abide by. And I think that two of the fact situations we've been talking about is a perfect example. So those guidelines are changing. They're becoming more specific. They're being clarified and modified. But there are some guidelines that we have to comply with that we may not totally agree with.
Jeff.
Well, I was just going to say, I don't completely agree, and I'm not a clinician, as you well know. They're trying to create state guidelines for the whole population. We're talking about a garden tour for people in their 70s and 80s. So this is a very high-risk population group. We, as Daryl mentioned, we went and presented to Woodhaven last Sunday with 4 people, myself and 3 Board of Health people. We divided up the population into 3 groups and did the presentation 3 times. So we never had more than 10 people in a group at once, so that we gave the same exact presentation and took questions for 2 hours, because we did 3 half-hour sessions with some space in between. So while I understand that regulations may be changing, this is a very high-risk population. I wouldn't change for this group. I would schedule, like Matt said, I would schedule, you can have tour groups and just have them start at different times, perhaps, or some way in which you can keep it, have everyone be able to participate, but in separate groups. I think.
Well, we currently have two tours going through, but we're already filling up and I'm turning people away. So we do have 2 tours, and with 10 people each. But again, we have 3 employees. So, and two hosts. So it's with 2 tours, it leaves 5 people that can come. That's all. And so I guess when you hear the new regulations set forth, just let us know. And of course, we're going to adhere by them and put all the precautions in place. But we just want to consider that people want to get out. They do want to engage, and they're looking forward to these activities. And I think we can do and provide those in a safe environment. So just keep us informed.
Thanks, Renee.
Okay, and that's certainly a concern. As Matt said, right, Farm Pond is operating under that's certainly going to be more than 10 people. But as he said, it's groupings of 10 and then some distance between. And so that's incorporated into how Farm Pond is going to work, even in the absence of this potential new interpretation. So something, Renee, to keep in mind, depending on what happens, if you have multiple groups of 10 or there don't have to be defined groups, but the separation is maintained, there is such a strong tendency for people to drift together. It's very hard. That's how we're programmed. That's how we've been behaving our entire lives. So you're going to have to just try to stay on top of it and make sure that people keep those masks on, don't slide them down below their nose, that kind of thing, so that that group stays safe. Because the 95% of deaths are in the over 65 population. So now there are underlying conditions usually associated with that. So it's not merely the age, but it's still a very different level of risk that you want to protect for. If it's a windy day, that's different. But if it's a gentle breeze and someone's constantly downwind of somebody else, there are just so many factors that we do not understand yet. So err on the side of caution.
No, I agree.
And still have the event, just.
Oh, yeah, no. But another point was brought up. Can we have one employee like at the top of, farm road, and just having people drive down the driveway so they're not counted as the 10th person? So, I mean, I think there's, we're trying to adhere to the
Yeah.
10.
Yeah.
Yeah, so.
And that 10 may be gone, and we'll let you know for sure on that.
Perfect. Thank you.
But yes, and as Matt said, that person at the end of the driveway is in a group by themselves.
Okay.
Different group. That might work too.
Yeah, that's good.
All right, do we have any other questions for the COVID team? Because I want to keep going on our agenda if not.
I just would like to say that think of how tough it was to go through thinking about a garden party, which is outdoors, spread apart, all those things. It's still take that and multiply it by 500 for all the other things we're talking about all the time that are more complex situations. So
I think one other comment I would just make is I think, we have a number of Sherborn businesses who I think have just done an exceptional job adhering to a very difficult set of circumstances and guidelines. And I think that as we acknowledge the exceptional work that I think we got from the fire department and the police department and really across the board, I think also those private businesses that are part of our community as well have just been exceptional stakeholders in this. And I think it's important to kind of say that out loud and acknowledge it as well.
And encourage people to support those businesses because they've had a really hard 3 months. And I know the Heritage, I think, was reopening tonight. So unfortunately, I don't think Mother Nature cooperated with them very much, but I would encourage everybody to support our local businesses.
they did do a great job.
Thank you. All right, so we're going to move on. Thank you, Daryl. Thank you, Dr. Vitale and Jeff and Zach and Lieutenant Bento and Sean. So moving on, our next item is Heidi Doyle Library State Grant Award Reissuance. Heidi, are you on here?
Yes.
Hi, Heidi.
Hi. So yesterday we had our bid for the reissuance of the state grant anticipation note, which was the portion of the state grant, the last one that we don't get to the completion of the building. So the amount is $726,720. And we had 3 bids, which range from 1.3, 1.07, and 0.95 on the interest rate. So the low bidder is 0.95. It is Century Bank and Trust. So I'm asking for a vote to approve awarding the bid to Century Bank and Trust for the 1-year library state grant anticipation note.
Mr. Chair.
Do I have a motion?
Mr. Chair.
Yes.
I move to vote to reissue the library state grant grant anticipation note in the amount of $726,720 for the time period from June 30th, 2020 to June 30th, 2021 to Century Bank and Trust. Forms will need to be signed and move for authorization to have these town administrators sign on behalf of the individual board members.
Do I have a second?
Second.
Second by Mr. Waldron. We'll take a roll call vote, even though Paul is not here right now. I guess we'll just vote without him. Mr. Johnson.
Aye.
Mr. Waldron.
Aye.
Mr. Yan.
Aye. And
I vote aye. So by a vote of 4-0, it's approved. Thanks, Heidi.
Okay, so David's gonna just sign the one note, not?
Yeah, David, we just authorized David to sign it for us.
Okay, so.
Then we don't all have to come into town hall.
Okay, and then just as just an upcoming, I will be going for a general obligation bond, a long-term bond, and because the rates are pretty good, so I'll be putting that forth and getting that together, and I can update you later on the summer with that progress.
Great. Thank you, Heidi.
Thank you.
Good job, Heidi.
The next item on our agenda is consideration of seasonal dock permit for Farm Pond pursuant to General Law, Chapter 91, Section 10A. Do I have a motion or questions or? Board members, do anybody want to move to approve this or?
I just one question. Is this dock up pretty much every year?
Yeah. I think they're good for a couple of years, but you have, we only get them maybe once a year. And
I meant this specific dock. Has this been up like for years? You know,
Okay, Jeannie, go ahead.
Jeannie has.
Oh, Jeannie, you're muted. We can't hear you.
I think the house sold.
Oh, just a second. You're muted again. There you go, Jeannie.
Okay. The house sold, and these are the new owners. They have to get conservation permission to do it. They go through a notice of intent. This permit is good for 10 years. So each of these permits are good for 10 years. And then after that, they can do it annually, semi-annually, whatever the board. But it has to be approved by conservation and the board of selectmen. And we've had, in the, I don't know, 20-something years I've been around, this is the third one that I can remember us doing.
Now, I get that, except for the third. That's interesting, in fact. And I get the procedure. But this dock, has this dock been up before? Is this a brand new dock?
No, this is a new dock.
Yeah, and just to clarify, this permit would be for about 10 and a half years, because the permit would expire on December 31st, 2030. So it'll be effective from today's date until.
This property's had a dock before, though.
Yeah, that's kind of what I was
Property has had a dock before, yes.
So this is just a new dock.
This is a brand new dock.
Okay.
Yeah, but
And the conservation had a very extensive list of order of conditions, so I think. Paul,
I move approval.
do I have a second?
Second.
All right. Do we have any other comments, questions before we go to vote? If not, Mr. Durensis,
Aye.
Mr. Johnson,
Aye.
Mr. Waldron,
aye.
Mr. Yan,
Aye.
and I vote aye, 5-0. Thank you. Next item on the agenda is amended all liquor license, Heritage of Sherborn signatures. What is this about, David? Because we voted to approve this already, correct?
Yeah, you voted it already, so you're just signing it in the open meeting.
Oh,
So Jeannie
Jeannie, go ahead.
has.
Wait, you're muted again.
Yes, to do it. There you go.
Yeah, go
Okay.
ahead, Jeannie.
This is the license that you guys issue every December.
Okay.
And it's, and on the license, there's a specific amount of space that the license is good for. And when you sent the amendment to the ABCC, they approved it. So you just have to sign an amended license that will at Heritage.
So do we have to make a motion to have David sign it for us, or does one of us have, do I need to come in and sign it, or what's the?
Yeah, you can make a motion as the local authority, licensing authority, to have David sign it.
So do I have a motion to approve the town administrator signing this on behalf of the board?
So moved.
Second.
Moved by Mr. Johnson, seconded by Mr. Durensis. Roll call vote. Mr. Durensis,
Yes.
Mr. Johnson,
Aye.
Mr. Waldron,
Aye.
Mr. Yan.
Yes.
I vote aye, so 5-0. Thank you. Next item is 2020 annual town meeting. Discussion on annual town meeting quorum. I know Mary Wolf is on here, so I would love to hear from her and about kind of what we think on this, and maybe get opinion from other board members as to what we're doing here.
Mary's
And also Jackie, I think, should be unmuted as well.
Oh, Jackie as well. Thank you.
Jackie and I have talked about this.
Okay. Mary, do you want to get started on this?
Sure. So with respect to the quorum, we can, the Board of Selectmen can by 2/3 vote to lower the quorum from the customary quorum of 100 people. It can be lowered to no fewer than 10 people. And it can be lowered to anything in between. As I understand it, the board is favoring doing a full warrant so that people don't have to be brought back. My concern is if we keep the quorum at 100 people and we get 87 people or 93 people, we can't hold the meeting.
All right. Paul.
Just want to
Go ahead, Paul.
just want to outline the legal process here is that we can't vote this tonight. What the law says is we have to decide whether we have an intention to adjust the quorum. If we have an intention, then we vote that intention, and then we have to publish it. And there has to be at least 7 days notice of the meeting in which we actually vote. And at that meeting in which we actually vote, the idea is there's supposed to be public input, and the moderator has a veto power. Also, she has to approve the quorum number. So it's premature today to decide what quorum number we need to decide, because we have to keep our minds open to listen to what the public has to say.
Mhm.
The issue for us today is, do we want to consider a quorum reduction? And if we want to do that, then do we want to advance the process by putting a notice in the newspaper and putting it on a future agenda item for the real discussion of what number ought to be utilized?
Okay. Jackie, do you have any thoughts on this?
Not really. I mean, Mary and I discussed it. I mean, I think that whatever we do, the last thing we want is to have to continue the town meeting,
Mhm.
you know, and to another time, because we don't know what's going to happen in the fall. So I would love it if we somehow a decision was made that we just, you know, have a number in mind that we can fulfill all the warrant articles and vote on everything and just get town meeting over with.
Okay.
So.
I was going to just add, George.
Yeah, go ahead, Jeff.
Dover did lower Dover's town meetings in 2 weeks, I think. They lowered their quorum to 18 people.
Well, Eric, did you have something to add?
Just that, as discussed before, I support lowering it, be it the process that Paul laid out or whatever it is. I would definitely support lowering it. I like lowering it to a lower number because I think more people likely to show up. Maybe we make it, 19 to be a little bit better.
Mary, did you have something to add?
Well, just that I think when the discussion of lowering it is taking place, we want to make it very clear to the voters that this is absolutely a minimum and not a maximum. So, you can set it as low as you want, and we encourage as many people as possible to actually come to the meeting. It's just if people don't feel comfortable coming and we don't get 100 and we don't lower it, then we have to.
We still want to have it. Paul?
Yeah, I've been through this discussion with several of my towns. So I want to recall to you some of the discussion that I've overheard. So first of all, 2 of my towns have no quorum requirements at all. And it works quite well with those towns. They always have a good turnout. Every voter knows that if they don't show up, they're basically surrendering their right to make decisions to those who do show up. It's a common process in democracy. It's the same thing with elections. There's no minimum quorum to being elected to any position. It's just whoever shows up and votes, they decide the day. So having no quorum requirements works well everywhere. I want to emphasize the point that the moderator made, which is there is a complete disconnect between quorum and attendance. Any number of people can attend the Sherborn town meeting. It's an open town meeting. Everybody's invited to come. Everybody has notice of the opportunity to be there. We could have 500 people. We could have 300 people. The quorum is a legal term that says if you're below this number, you cannot conduct any business and you have to adjourn. So whatever quorum we set should not be a message to anybody not to come to town meeting or that you're not welcome at town meeting.
Right.
The third point I would make is it takes a lot of work to set up these town meetings, a lot of energy from a lot of people, putting together warrant articles, finding facilities and so on. And if we go through all that trouble and we have 99 people there who have gone to all the trouble of being brave souls, and we have to send them home, what a discourtesy it is to them. And would they really come again a week later? That's just rude to them.
Right.
We're asking people, I mean, hopefully things will be very safe by then. But for some people, particularly if you look around at our community, some people are in the vulnerable group, and those are the people who go to town meeting. We're asking them to step out of their comfort zone and do their job for the town as legislators. What an awful thing to do is to have them do all of that, come forward, and then tell them they have to go home.
Right.
Because one person didn't show up if you're at 99.
I like the idea, Paul, that you mentioned of, like, for this year alone, like waiving the quorum. I mean, what's the point? Oh, you can't?
You can't go below 10%.
Oh, okay. I was just saying, like, what's the difference between 18 and 19? You know, like, how do we arbitrarily set a number? So what is our 10%?
Has to be at least 10 people.
Okay, so I think we should consider doing it at 10, and then whoever, you know, that's where we're at.
Well, if the process of Paul laid out before, if it has to be decided later and decided later, just keep in mind, if advisory and select board shows up, you get 14 automatically.
Yeah, exactly. And then you've got Mary as the town moderator, and you've got Jackie as the town clerk, and
Jeannie will come.
Dover's quorum was 175, so that's how they got to 18. It's 10%. They round up, so it's 10% also.
I thought it's because you could do the 2/3. You know, when you need 2/3, I always thought multiple 3 would make sense.
all right. So what is the process from here then on the quorum thing? You said we don't vote on it tonight.
Well, if I could, I'll make a motion that the Board of Selectmen vote to initiate the process of considering a reduction in the quorum and to publish a notice of intent for a meeting to consider and deliberate upon a reduction of quorum at a date, and tell me what
Our
date
next
is.
meeting's June 25th. Do you want to do it then?
That should be fine.
Okay,
To consider it on June 25th.
perfect. Do I have a second?
And the public is invited to participate.
I'll
Does
second
the
whatever.
motion say, just to clarify the motion, George, would it say reduce it to 10, or we don't specify the number?
We don't need to specify tonight. We're gonna have we're literally making a motion to put this on the agenda for the 25th to have a discussion with the public.
Okay.
Yeah, so the meeting will have to get posted on the website 7 days in advance. So it'll have to be posted by the 18th.
Okay.
It has to be published.
Yep.
Newspaper.
So Diane, you've got that, right?
Okay,
David.
It
Diane.
also has to be posted on the website, like a regular meeting.
We'll make sure it gets posted next week, so then it's more than a week in advance.
So I would second Paul's motion.
Okay, great. I'll do a roll call vote. Mr. Durensis.
Aye.
Mr. Johnson.
Aye.
Mr. Waldron.
Aye.
Mr. Yan.
Aye.
I vote aye. Thank you. The next item is consideration of 2020 annual town meeting warrant.
We don't have any warrant change, so nothing was nothing was distributed for the warrant.
Okay.
At some point, we need to go with the full warrant or the split warrant.
Yeah, I think I think we should look at the full warrant, and maybe we should really go through it at our next meeting. Mary, I saw your hand go up. Go ahead.
Yes, just one more thing that I think really needs to happen at your next meeting is a decision about the venue and the date of the town meeting, because it's currently scheduled for the 27th and it's indoors. I think we've heard a tremendous amount tonight in favor of possibly moving the town meeting out of doors, which would
Okay.
require a change of date because you'd want to do it in the daytime, so.
Right.
I thought we voted that already.
Well, no, we haven't voted a date. We talked about Tuesday, the 25th. We've also talked about Saturday, the 22nd.
Jackie has a problem.
The 22nd.
What's that?
I cannot do the 22nd because,
Thank God you said that, Jackie, because I've already spent a birthday at a town meeting. I don't want to spend my anniversary there either.
okay, okay. All the, you know, the legislature.
Jackie and I can both make
Sorry, Mary, you're breaking up a little bit.
15.
That's strange.
Okay, the
Mary, I think we
legislature.
lost Mary's connection. Jackie, go ahead.
Okay, the legislature is still voting on all of the stuff for the fall elections, and everything that we are hearing is that, and I got an email from David Linsky the other day, and it looks like we are going to have 7 days of early voting for the primary, and that will start on August 22nd, which is a Saturday.
I'm sorry.
So-
Everybody froze on me. I heard nothing.
Yeah, we couldn't hear you either, Mary, so go ahead and finish your point.
No, I didn't have, I was just, you know, the Jackie can't make the 22nd, so.
Right, okay,
talked about
good.
Possibly the 15th,
So if we did it on a Saturday, the 15th would be the date.
yeah.
That works.
So don't we have to do the advisory hearing 30 days before the town meeting? Is that right?
Well, it's not an exact number. They are, at their meeting last night, they are anticipating meeting on July 18th, I believe. for
No,
their
it's the,
hearing.
I don't know if that's it. They booked, Steve booked a meeting, a public hearing with the select board today for the 9th. I
Yeah.
booked that, so I don't know if that's something different, but it.
That's something different, Jackie. That's for the year-end transfers.
Yeah.
Okay, right, correct. You're right. I'm sorry. Yes, it was. That's correct.
So they were talking about the 18th last night.
That's a
And,
Saturday. That would be
yeah.
like their bloody Saturday just a few months later.
Right. So, you know, you can, Jeannie, is Jeannie still on?
Yeah, Jeannie's on here.
Okay, so Jeannie knows how much time she needs to turn their report around to
Yeah.
get it out the right number of days before and so forth. Jeannie and
The report has to be in the households 10 days prior to town meeting. So if you have town meeting on the 15th on a Saturday, it would have to be in, I'd like it to be mailed by the 3rd or the 4th. So
Okay.
I need probably a week for the printer to turn it around. We use the same printer every year, so he knows what needs to be done.
Yeah.
So that would,
So July 18th would probably work because that gives advisory a week to get the
Right.
report done.
it should work, July 18th.
Yeah.
Yeah.
It
I'll
sounds
clarify
like-
with Steve. He told me he couldn't stay for our whole meeting tonight. He'd been on meetings every night this week, so.
George?
Yeah,
So I wouldn't want to vote on a date of town meeting without knowing that we have an outdoor facility that's in play and that we can book for that day.
Right.
So I
Okay.
assume we're going to do it at the high school parking lot or something like that. And if that's
Diane, will you
available,
work on that for our next meeting, that we could determine that we could have the football field for August 15th?
I'll check that out tomorrow.
Yes, Marion, I see your hand up. Go ahead.
Yeah, I just want to throw in that in the meantime, Dover will have had their town meeting, I think, on the high school football field. And I'm wondering if one of our COVID-19 team is, or someone is going to be there to observe and see how that goes. From a distance, of course. No, but I think it'll be important for someone to have eyes and ears at that meeting, just to look at the logistics.
Thank you, Marion. Mary?
Yes, I think Marion is correct. I also would point out that, as I understand it from the Dover website, that they are actually setting a maximum.
That's correct.
They have reduced their quorum, but they are setting a maximum of 60 people. And if person number 61 shows up, they are going to recess their meeting. So their meeting may or may not happen. It's on a Monday at 11 o'clock in the morning, so whatever.
And it's the abridged, it's what they call Articles 3 and 4. It's just their operating budget and their capital expenditures.
Right, so
Jackie, did you?
you're right, Marion, but who knows what's actually gonna happen there.
Right.
Jackie, did you
I
have
think we
something?
also should look at it with an eye to seeing if we can accommodate more people. Because if we're having a full town meeting, you know, limiting it to 60 is really
Oh,
limiting.
no, we don't.
30.
I would not.
Mr. Chair.
That would not be, I don't want to limit
As
the.
we said, if we could have it on the football field, we hopefully can spread out enough that we could have as many people that want to come.
Exactly.
They have prescribed a very, very broad circle of around each person. So instead of like 6 feet, they've got like 15 or 20 feet surrounding each person. And that was how they got to the 60 people that they could fit there. So if we, go with the traditional what's accepted, then we would be able to get many more than they are.
Yeah.
George?
Chuck, go ahead.
Quick question. I'm sure the football field has the advantage of a large sound system, but I'm just thinking out loud, what about using Jameson Field and portable sound system?
I had thought about Jameson or Laurel, sure.
Because they're much, much bigger.
Mm-hmm.
You probably get 1,000 people on Jameson and still maintain social distancing. Okay, Daryl, 500 people.
Well,
the problem with Jameson is parking, Chuck.
Yeah, no, Laurel would be.
I think Sean's trying to get in.
Yeah, go ahead, Sean. I know you want to say something, and I know, Jackie, you've been trying to. Let me go to Jackie first, because Jackie's been trying to say something for a while now.
Well, I just wanted to say that I've been in touch with the superintendent's office, and they said that if we wanted to have it outside, that they would make it work and they would accommodate us. So, and I've also been talking to Felicia, the town clerk over in Dover too. So I can call tomorrow and find out if the 15th is available and try to get something set up. But, I'll let Sean speak.
Okay, go ahead, Sean.
Yeah, well, half of my comment got taken up, but if there's any town in Massachusetts that can find a place for an outdoor town meeting, I would hope that it would be Sherborn, and we wouldn't be going to Dover to do it. There's plenty of parking for a brew fest in downtown. We can certainly have a town meeting, or we could do it at Laurel. It's very controllable at Laurel. It's very safe. There's plenty of ways we can do an outdoor town meeting with 40 or 50 acres. If not, we could probably find a farm around town that could host it.
That's the Willis's.
We only need 10 people too, so we're good to go.
Exactly. But I don't want to kick out the 61st person either.
Right.
Right. Well, no, Laurel, I think Laurel's a better idea. Laurel has a huge parking lot, whereas Jameson, I'd worry a little bit just because Pine Hill Lane would be packed with cars, and I just, Jameson isn't the most logistically easy place if a bunch of people show up, whereas I think Laurel would probably be a better choice if we're going to have it in town.
Okay, so then if we had it in town, we'd have to arrange for renting chairs and have all that stuff set up.
Correct.
And you have to definitely make sure you accommodate anything ADA, if any ADA issues, and anything outdoors or in a field.
Right. Sounds to me like we should, or you should make this decision after seeing how the Dover meeting works on the high school football field.
If you use George?
Facilities
yes,
may be
Paul.
better. Oh, it's smaller. Yeah, okay.
If we're going to use Laurel Fields, I just want to reiterate the alternative that's at least one of my towns is using, which is this drive-in model, where people literally drive in on the grass and stay in their cars the whole time, never leave their cars. They have little voting cards they hold out the window, and they set up these FM station so people can hear on the radio what's going on, and no one ever leaves their car.
That's another interesting idea.
They could get a flu shot too while they're there.
Hey, Paul,
That's how
how
we're
much
setting
land
the
do you
football.
have? Can we have the town meeting at your house?
Can I charge admission?
Well, I like this. I came in, sorry, I had to take an urgent Board of Health call. So sounds like you've got town meeting all figured out.
Well, we're working on it.
Yeah, sounds good.
An ideal spot would be the Mendon Drive-In
Yeah, there you go.
You get the Andelmans on the line.
All right, so I think what we should do, let's all do some, we'll do some research about venues and everything between now and our next meeting, where we'll discuss both the forum and I think location and date on that. And we can determine them all on the 25th of June.
I was just going to add one thing, George. One problem will be with COVID, the hardest thing is going to be porta potties.
Mm-hmm.
Actually
Another rental, as Jackie said, we're going to have to rent a lot of.
Well, yeah, but with COVID, they're not allowing porta potties right now. I think so.
We'll definitely do it at Paul's place then.
Yeah, that's.
Mary, go ahead.
It seems like a
This is
trivial
actually-
thing, but it's not.
This is actually a serious comment. I
Yes.
believe in conversation I've had with the Dover Town moderator that they are not allowing restrooms.
Yeah.
Correct, but we're
If
contemplating.
you have to go, you really have to leave.
That's how they limit the conversations.
But we're contemplating doing the full warrant of 23 articles or whatever it is, and they're only doing 2 articles.
Whatever.
Yeah.
Well, can I say something? So one thing that Mary and I discussed today is that if you guys do want to do the full warrant, is possibly having people do presentations like all the zoning stuff online, and then everyone that wants to go has already, seen the presentation. And so, hopefully the discussion will be limited so that we can move through, town meeting more quickly than we normally do.
Yep, Paul.
Yeah,
go ahead.
Yeah, this has been an idea I've been touting with all my communities. It's called a split town meeting, where you have a virtual town meeting and then you have a voting session. The point of the virtual is, like next Monday night, I'm having a virtual town meeting in one of my towns. All the articles are going to be called. The presenters are going to make their presentations. There's going to be an audience of 300 or 400 people. There's going to be slides. There's going to be PowerPoints. There's going to be questions and answers for all articles. When we get to the voting session, that has to be done by law in person. Cannot be done virtually. So you actually have to have people assemble. But if we did a consent agenda for the entire warrant, and the moderator just calls out the articles, see if anybody has an article they want to have separately voted, that article gets held, and everything else gets voted in accordance with the advisory committee's motions or the planning board's motions. In one motion, you're done. You've adopted 27 articles, or maybe 26, and one article actually has to have a separate vote.
Right. I've had this discussion with the moderator actually already about doing this, where it's actually like a large consent agenda and people only hold article, like if there's any articles held for further discussion, that's the only ones you end up voting on outside that large consent agenda. Right, Mary? Is that?
Yes, yes. I think that's in this case, I think it's a reasonable thing to do, although I do think that you need to allow people who could not attend the virtual meeting, you need to provide discussion if someone wants to discuss something.
Right. Chuck?
Yes, but could I just add that you want to film that virtual thing and you want to have it playing endlessly on cable TV so people can see all of that stuff. Yes, there may be somebody who has a question, but normally the moderator should preside over the virtual town meeting. And at the end of the virtual town meeting, the moderator should say, if there's anybody who has any questions that didn't get a chance to ask those questions, please text, email, whatnot, and we'll get them to the article sponsors, and they'll answer you directly. So to the extent that you can minimize all of that, you can have a pretty quick town meeting.
Chuck?
Paul basically made the same point I was going to make, and I think Jackie's suggestion of having this preloaded can also help. One thing we might want to consider is, other than some ADA compliance, we may want to have people stand. We don't want this to be a long meeting. Some people need to sit. I think if we all are forced to stand, it'll shorten speeches like the one I'm just making.
I think Marion's got a question.
Yeah, go ahead, Marion.
Yeah, I do. I have a concern about the model that Paul suggests, although I think it sounds brilliant if it works best. And I discussed this briefly with Mary before, but I'll say it here. My worry, being a proponent of an article that really may spur some discussion, I hope it does, but we don't know which way it's going to go. I'd be concerned that people who couldn't make it or didn't bother to make it to the preparatory informational meeting would come to the voting meeting with preconceived wrong ideas about the article and just come and vote it down. So that's my personal worry. Thinking of the article that I hope will pass is my very personal worry. So I'd like to hear how that would work, Paul, in the towns that are doing it.
Mary, go ahead.
I just, listening to Marion also reminded me of the fact that not all of our articles, including Marion's article, are majority votes. So we have one that is 4/5, and anything that's going to be borrowed is
2/3.
2/3, and Marion's articles are 2/3. So,
right.
If I'm thinking this through, if you put it all in a single consent agenda, then the entire agenda has to pass by 4/5.
Right, 2/3.
Right, but they pass
Oh,
unanimously.
right.
But the whole point of the consent agenda is, by the time you get to the end of the consent agenda, it is unanimous, and these things pass unanimously. So it covers all the bases.
Okay.
Across the board. You don't need to take separate
Now
votes.
that Elliot doesn't live in town.
But I would say one of the wrinkles that the town of Natick came up with was not to allow one voter to hold, but to require 7 voters to hold. That way that it's a serious hold. It's not just a gadfly who wants to hear himself speak. And a modification of that is to have 2 votes. One was basically a motion and a second. So the 2 voters have to hold an article. The idea that any one voter can hold an article seems inefficient and doesn't signal that the issue being held is serious and really worthy of debate if there's no one else who's willing to stand for holding it.
I like that idea.
Although we have always done it that way, and would we not need to ask the participants to vote on that change?
Yes, at the beginning, part of the rules.
Yes.
Yep. Addie May?
Yeah, I just wanted to say, I think the idea of having a town meeting in Sherborn is somewhat appealing because I think in part the reason why we had such a great turnout for the special town meeting in December 2017 was because it was in Sherborn. I mean, I know Dover Sherborn High School auditorium is for both towns, but for logistics and for people to remember that something's happening in their own town, sometimes it is nice when it is in our town. So, and then people could bring their lawn chairs like they do for baseball games and soccer games. So I know it could be done fairly simply.
Thank you, Addie. All right, so I think we've got a good discussion here that we should continue on the 25th once we have a little more information and we kind of put it out there that we're going to discuss the reduction of quorum. So we'll continue the conversation then. The next item on the agenda is the fiscal year 2021 budget discussion. Sharon?
You didn't know.
It's still a work in progress rather. We're close. We're very close. There's a few more departments that we're still looking at. I'm reconciling from version 9 to version 10. We had some good news about new growth, and so I'm incorporating that into the model. So we're very close.
I had a question. This is the background materials submitted. When the list of employees under Department 122, is that a current list of employees?
That includes, yeah, it is a current list, but it also includes seniors that are getting, I forget what it's called, but.
Well, the tax incentive or whatever for work.
Yeah, tax
for
incentive,
work.
like volunteering.
Okay.
Okay.
I'm not, well, I'll talk to you offline.
Okay.
And then there was also, I know there's discussions with the schools going on, right, Sharon, about, I think they had a big surplus at the region and whether there's going to be turnbacks or they want to hold it in E&D. I know there's a discussion about that.
Yeah. Yeah, and there's still, Stephen's working on that. And
great.
Yeah.
Excellent. Okay, the last item on this section is consideration of reopening warrant, consideration of purchase of 5 Washington Street.
Well, I have a question on that. Has there been any progress toward getting the assessment, the ADA, and just a general upgrade cost analysis? That's always been hinging on that.
Yep,
Yeah.
David?
We're bringing in talking with Sean and Diane and I, we're bringing in On-Site Insight, and they're going to do the report for us so that we can actually compare it to other buildings and integrate systems and project what the costs would be and the operating costs. So it's really the best way to get an independent number of what those costs would be to come up to ADA. And, you know, that we have some guesstimates already, but we're just going to wait for that report from On-Site Insight.
And to clarify, it's to bring up from minimum compliance, and then we talk about just the next step beyond that, the must-haves and the nice-to-haves. I want to be able to see that and what it would take.
Yeah, I don't think there's really any nice-haves that we'll be adding in. It's how it needs to be brought up to a public building, including, you know, heat, AC, security alarm, sprinkler, ADA accessibility. The only nice have is there's a wall to be taken down that's probably weight supporting and will have to be rebuilt with some sort of arch. But I think that's the only alteration that's a nice to have. Everything else is all just to get the building into a public building form.
And do you think we'll have that by the time so we can integrate it into the town meeting?
Definitely. I want it done for you guys for the 26th, meeting on the 26th, in advance of that.
Jeff?
Yeah, I want to ask David a question. I don't think they typically, On-Site Insight looks at the well or the septic systems.
Yeah, they do.
Will they include both those?
Yeah.
Jeff?
Yes.
Go ahead, Sean.
We're compiling all that information together, and we will be looking at that. They typically don't look at least in the past, we haven't been looking at projects outside of just replacement.
Yes.
Because our buildings were all pretty much static. We were just doing 20-year capital needs assessment. We will be integrating improvements that we need. And if the well needs that improvement, then that's going to be included in that. If the septic, we're analyzing whether the septic, albeit new, is going to cover us for.
Well, I think the well has to be converted from a private well to a public water supply, I think.
I believe it does. And that On-Site Insight won't be able to totally summarize that in the next 2 weeks. But if that's the case, we're going to analyze that internally anyway. If that's the case, then that's kind of a big deal.
There are also
summarize that for you.
There are also doorways that aren't ADA compatible or accessible. Even the bathroom isn't accessible. So there's some serious modifications that need to be made. One architect has said that it needs an elevator. So the number just keeps getting higher and higher.
And I think, I mean, I don't know if this is an appropriate discussion for right now, but I mean, I've talked to a few people about this, like, instead of buying this building, building a single-story 2,500 square foot building on the caustic lot seems a lot cheaper than looking at this building that's, I mean, just based on general construction costs, $200 a foot buys you a lot.
Yeah.
And if this is a 2,500 square foot building, 500,000 would build you quite a building that's a lot less than this building plus all the costs. It's just something to keep in people's minds as a senior center. You know, we got to look at all the alternatives for a senior center, not just because this building's for sale.
Even trying for a prefab temporarily while they build or design or raise money or whatever they have to do to build next door. The
And
prefabs are pretty
And
reasonable.
I did speak to David Linsky earlier today, and the 100,000 from the bond bill was from 12 years ago, which pretty much means it's not there anymore. It's so long ago that we would have to go back and ask for any state money again. It's not like it's guaranteed that we have 100,000 sitting there the state's waiting to give us. So just to clarify on a few points that have been made on this, this is a long way to go, and I want to consider every option, not just this property.
I think Daryl's got her hand raised, George.
Daryl, go ahead.
Okay, so on the well, just for your information, for a public water supply, you cannot just take an existing private well and get it grandfathered in and turn it into a public water supply. It would have to meet, it would be considered new. It would have to meet all current regulations. If it had been a public water supply before, different story, but it has not been. And given the size of that property and the coverage, so for example, you need a zone 1 around a well. Let's say it's a 100-foot radius. That's a pretty big radius for that small property. And that radius cannot include a building or a paved area or anything else. So I think that is a very basic, very physical limitation kind of thing to evaluate.
Thank you. Chuck.
Yeah, and just to reiterate, at our last meeting, we were talking about starting potential negotiations, but also the motion was to evaluate the suitability of 5 Washington Street as a senior center. I think included in that is exploring the caustic option.
Oh, be nice to your dog.
Sorry about that.
So that would include exploring whether or not the caustic property and modulars would work, whether or not the community center would work. So I don't support opening the warrant. I don't think we've got nearly enough data. I share Eric's view, which is that we have to have an idea of what the costs are for 5 Washington. In terms of ADA compliance, in terms of the well, in terms of capital costs going forward.
You also have a retaining wall issue that's been hanging around for several years on the Route 27 side.
Right.
Oh, that's right.
Yeah.
Yeah, I forgot about that.
Okay, so I don't think we're considering reopening the warrant at this point. I think there's a lot more data that has to happen before we even consider doing that. Okay. Unless there's anything else, I'm going to move on to the next agenda item, which is consideration of administrative and routine business. Finance Director, you have some reserve fund transfer requests.
Yeah, a couple things. The first thing I want to do is I want to set a date for the final virtual meeting between the Select Board and Advisory Committee so that we can go over any budget transfers that need to be made. And I'm proposing a date of July 9th. And I wanted to know if that would work for everyone, because then what I need to do is follow up, communicate with all the department heads and make sure that they are aware and they can participate in the meeting if they need to have a budget transfer. So does that date work for people?
I gotta get that AC on.
Yes, sorry.
Okay.
It works for me. How about Paul, we voted earlier on our consent agenda to have meetings on June 25th and July 9th, and I didn't hear any objections then, so.
It works for me as long as it's virtual.
Absolutely.
I don't think there's any rush to be back to live meetings anytime soon, so.
Okay. Okay, perfect. I'll let the department heads know and I'll start that process. Okay. and
Lieutenant
then-
Bento.
Oh, yes. You're on mute. All right, the next item has to do with the fact that because we're not having our annual town meeting to get our budget approved for 2021.
He just told me.
So what we're going to need to do is we're going to need to file, I reached out to my DOR rep, and what we need to do is file a monthly deficit spending approval. It was in your packet, and in this approval, typically what we would do is we would take 1/12 of our FY 2020 budget, and then we can enhance that for certain items. So for example, what I'd like to propose is that we do implement the COLA for staffing, and that would, a quick and dirty calculation is about $30,000 a month if we were to roll out the COLA. And, you know, because we're going to be voting on that at the annual town meeting, if it's I'm sure it will, hopefully will be approved. In order to streamline that process, by rolling that into our deficit spending approval, it makes it a lot easier for the accounting department, because if we didn't do it, then when the budget finally gets approved, then we'd have to retroactively go in and calculate the retro for each and every employee. So, and then the other consideration is the fact that we do pay our Middlesex County retirement. We pay that in advance, the beginning of July. And the reason we do that is because we get a quick pay discount, which we wouldn't want to lose that. So that's another item that we could incorporate. So I did share this with our DOR rep, and she looked at it and said it looked reasonable, and she didn't think we'd have any issues with it. I also talked with Dawn Fattori, and she said that on June 1st, she actually submitted her budget information to DESE, and they actually have to go through a complex calculation and to come up with what her 1/12 is going to be. And at this point, I don't have that number. So we're going to have to revisit this on June 25th at the next meeting. She should have it by then. So we can't really vote on this now, but I would like to decide or get your opinion on the 2%, whether you think it's appropriate to roll that out for July 1.
Paul?
I just want to brief you on the law here.
Okay.
It's called the rule of 1/12, but the MMA and others made a point of the fact that many municipal expenses are not evenly divided out over the year.
Mm-hmm.
And things like pension payments, if you pay it all at once in the beginning of the year, you get a substantial discount. So what the legislature did was what we call the rule of 1/12 plus.
Okay.
And so where there are contractual obligations, these kinds of things like pensions and payments to employees, these are things that are eligible to be added to the 1/12. Because we can do it, I think we should do it. The people, the taxpayers will get a great benefit from paying the pension stuff in advance. We get a discount on that. That's an important savings for the community. That certainly should be added to the 1/12. And similarly, our town depends on our workers, and they're entitled to get paid. That was a number that had been established as being a fair and reasonable number for them. Why shouldn't they get paid? So I would support the proposed plan that has been put together by the finance director.
Right. And as you said, I don't think we're going to vote on it tonight though, Paul. So don't make a motion now.
We're not going to vote on it?
No, because she needs the school.
I need the school, but I do need you to approve the, well, the 2%, so that we can get working on that, because
Okay.
there's a lot of work associated with that. Each director has to look at their staff. They need to fill out a personnel action form so that and sign it. We have to put it in the employee's file. So there's quite a bit of work. So if you could just approve that, I can move forward with that.
Okay. Do you want to make
So
a motion,
moved.
Paul?
Yes.
Okay. Do I have a second?
Second.
Second by Mr. Yan. So we'll do a roll call vote. Mr. Durensis.
Aye.
Mr. Johnson.
Aye.
Mr. Waldron.
Aye.
Mr. Yan.
Aye.
I vote aye, so 5-0 on that.
Excellent. Thank you
And
very
now
much.
we have some reserve fund transfers, correct, Sharon?
Yes, we do. The next one is a reserve fund transfer, and Sean's going to speak about this. It's $110,419. And this was actually presented to advisory back in March, and it was approved. But we pulled it off the agenda for the select board, and Sean wants to revisit that now because obviously we need to do that reserve fund transfer. So.
Okay, Sean, what is this for?
Yeah, so I actually, let me correct her a little bit. I presented this to you guys, and prior to taking a vote on it, this is just a reminder, you really just wanted to see where the reserve fund was going to shake out.
Right.
So it was punted at the time because it didn't really matter whether it was then or now. And of course, that was, I don't remember, but probably about 6 days before COVID shutdown, and
Right.
times certainly have changed, but it doesn't negate the fact that most of these decisions were already made. So if you're looking at the sheet in front of you, just to go through it again, there was some work that GLM did for us. One of the larger items is Green International doing work on the complete streets, which rolls into a project that's just about ready to go out to bid, but without a town meeting, we didn't have any capital funds. So that's kind of sitting, waiting to punt as well. But it's engineering that we knew we needed to do. And then the second Green International is work that was done on the Pine Hill. Some survey work that was done. I'd have to read. From 2009, 2010 annual town meeting where we were supposed to subdivide the land at Pine Hill. So that's now done, ready for deeds to be recorded.
Okay.
And then, as you'll all recall, we were directed to work on with Whitewater on the issues with the well issue at Leland Farms, and the possibility of an interconnection between Woodhaven and Leland Farms. That's in process as well. Of course, that was slowed down quite a bit by the COVID. Everyone's been shut down. They're back up and running, but the testing and engineering that should have been done or would have been done the past few months hasn't been done yet, but it's in process. So
Right. Now I remember this now, Sean. I remember when we looked at this. Darren, I just have the one question that I ask you every single time we do a reserve fund transfer. What's our balance and what would be after this?
Okay, so right now our balance is $265,200. So this would reduce it down to $155,000.
Okay. And we have another one that we're considering tonight, or was that something different?
This is a different, we don't want to hit the reserve fund just because
Okay.
we're talking about a stabilization fund, and I'll get to that.
That's something different. Thank you.
Yeah.
Okay, did anybody have any other questions for Sean on this, so we can get these bills paid? That it seems like work that's already been done, and we need to just do this, in my opinion. So anybody else have any questions? If not, I'll take a motion.
Question let's vote. My question is on this additional costs we know of that we may need for the reserve fund this year, if we know of any other ones.
Oh, I think it'll probably be more with those year-end transfers on July 9th. It's really kind of.
That's fine.
I actually did
snow and ice actually myself, but yeah.
I did receive some good news about all the expenses we've incurred related to COVID, and right now we paid out over 70,000. And what I can pull all those expenses out of our operating fund. I'm going to create a special fund for those, and then so the expenses will sit there, and then as the reimbursements come in, so that's going to free up some money.
We don't need to take that from the reserve fund, is what you're saying.
No, exactly.
Okay.
I don't need to. I'm going to pull it right out. So that's very good news. I just heard that yesterday. So
Thank you.
Great.
All right. Do I have a motion to approve this reserve fund transfer?
So moved.
So moved by Mr. Yan, second by Mr. Durensis. I'll take a roll call vote. Mr. Durensis.
Aye.
Mr. Johnson.
Aye.
Mr. Waldron.
Aye.
Mr. Yan.
Aye.
And I vote aye. So 5-0 on that reserve fund transfer. Now I know there's another discussion we have to have about a police cruiser. Is that correct, Sharon?
yes, and I sent a, I apologize for the late notice, but I just found out about this. I know at a recent select board meeting, we talked about capital items that were small in nature and potentially using free cash to fund those and not waiting for the annual town meeting. I reached out to the DOR and you cannot do that. They said that we could use our reserve fund. So we talked about that, and it just didn't seem like a great idea. And then they just passed legislation last week that allows select boards by a 2/3 vote to appropriate funds from our stabilization fund, so that we could acquire a capital item for FY 2021 early. And because we can't use our free cash, this is an option. And what we would do is replenish it. So if we were to pull, the proposal is 55,000. If we were to pull 55,000, when we move to our annual town meeting, we would add that back.
Right.
So it would just be a short-term situation. And the reason we want to do it is because there's a $15,000 savings that we would incur by doing that. And Dave Bento is on right now, and I'll just have him briefly speak about the
Well, yeah, while we're doing it now, that'd be great. Thanks,
Yeah.
Lieutenant Bento.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. So the reason that I brought this up was we just happened to hit, the year that we have the COVID crisis, and we're talking an August town meeting, is coming in at the same time that the vehicle that we planned on purchasing is going through a model year change, which is going to drive up the cost of the vehicle initially. It's also going to delay delivery of the vehicle. It's also going to drive up the cost of the emergency equipment that goes in the vehicle. And then lastly, it would mean that our trade-in or auction off of our old car would be delayed significantly, which would drive that cost down. So that's where I came up with the estimated cost, probably top out at about 15,000. Originally, our request to capital was for 63,000, and I dropped that down to 55,000 by repurposing some of the old equipment that's in the car that we're going to trade in. So that would not be a possibility, I don't think, if this were to go forward with a 2021 model year. Right now, I'm able to secure a 2020 as long as we make that purchase very early in July. I just can't delay that into August or September. We'd then be looking at the new model year. So that's why I brought this up, and I understand it was a very confusing process, law changes, which fund it came out of, et cetera. The main reason I brought it up was I was just trying to, save a few dollars on the end result, which is we really need the car anyway. We were going to get 2 cars and we dropped it down to 1. So I just thought we could do it sooner and save the town some money.
Great. Ms. Chuck?
Just one quick question. David and Sharon is very persuasive. A $15,000 savings makes it well worth doing. Maybe it was in the packet and I missed it. Has advisory approved this?
Yeah, they approved it last night. Sorry, Karen.
Yes.
I don't want to cut off discussion, but
This actually, Chuck, this was not in your packet. I emailed you later today because this would just kind of developed.
Yeah, I looked at it, but I couldn't remember whether or not the AC had approved it.
Yeah, advisory.
Yeah, I spoke to Stephen Leahy earlier this morning, and he thought it was a significant enough savings to the town to do it now. I think that's what they voted on last night, that they thought it made sense to borrow from the stabilization fund.
This seems like a no-brainer, and I'd move approval for the reserve fund transfer.
Okay, do I have a second?
Second.
Okay, second by Mr. Waldron. Any other comments, questions? If not, I'll take a roll call vote. Mr. Durensis.
Aye.
Mr. Johnson.
Aye.
Mr. Waldron.
Aye.
Mr. Yan.
Aye.
And I also vote aye. Thank you. Thanks for bringing this to attention, Dave. I appreciate it when people are finding ways to save the town money and do things in a smart way like that.
Thank you. Appreciate your time.
Yeah.
Okay. That, I'm done now. Thank you very much. Appreciate your support on all these issues.
I was gonna.
Thank you, Sharon. I appreciate it. I know you've been very busy with everything, so thanks for all your work on all this stuff.
One more financial thing, George. We canceled, and Sharon knows this, and Heidi does. We placed the order that we navigated in March to get the N95 masks, and they were only able to get 7,600 at the end of the day. So we canceled, and we're going to get a refund of around $7,800 that we had. We're going to get cash flow basis, get $7,800 back that we'd advanced from them. So we've canceled the remaining portion of that order.
Okay.
And I think we have, Zach's on here, I think we have probably just under 20,000 or 2,000 N95 masks right now, in that range.
Yeah, we're at 1,900 in Sherborn, so.
Okay. Do we have a town administrator report? You're muted, David. David, we can't hear you. There you go.
My own worst enemy. If Sean doesn't mind, I'd like him just to announce the 2 employees that he has retiring. And that's all we have.
Sean, unmute. There you go.
All right, there we go. Well, thanks, David, for the heads up.
Sean, I can get your sarcasm even though we can't see your face.
Yeah, there's a reason.
You need to say their names.
So June 30th is going to be John McAvoy's last day. And I don't have his paperwork in front of me. I didn't have anything written because I thought we'd do this on the 25th.
Yes.
But, and we will, but he's been working, he started 42 years ago, just to give some perspective. And also Dennis is going to be done on I think his last day is the 10th of July. He has 26 years in. So in the past, just over 6 months now, we've had a guy that was just under 42 years, a guy he will have gone just over 42 years and 26 years of experience walk out the door. That's a pretty significant change after 4 decades. So we'll have more to say, I think, at next meeting. I think we're going to have a couple things written up for them. But
great.
Yeah, this wasn't a tribute or anything. It was just a heads up that
right.
2 other retirements coming up.
Yeah, and speaking of retirements, I did at the school. I know at Pine Hill, was it Brody Help? Addie, you can help me with this if I forget. It's Brody Helperts and Miss Sullivan, and Miss Lundquist is leaving, and Miss Gallant, and Mr. Carnes, the gym teacher, is going to become the assistant principal at Chickering. So there's a big turnover happening at Pine Hill this year as well.
That's all I had.
Okay. Any select board reports? Nope. Okay. So I guess that brings us to our executive session. So we're going to adjourn to executive session under the following exemptions. The board will not return to open session. Item 1, MGL Chapter 30A, Section 21A, Subsection 3, to discuss strategy with respect to threat and potential litigation if an open meeting may have a detrimental effect on the litigation position of the town and the chair so declares library. And the chair does declare. Item 2, MGL Chapter 30A, Section 21A, Subsection 2, to conduct strategy sessions in preparation for negotiations with non-union personnel, fire chief. Item 3, MGL Chapter 30A, Section 21A, Subsection 3, to discuss strategy with respect to litigation if an open meeting may have a detrimental effect on the litigating position of the town, of the litigating position of the public body, and the chair so declares. And Subsection 6, to consider the purchase exchange, lease, or value of real property if the chair declares that an open meeting may have a detrimental effect on the negotiating position of the body, public body. Chair does declare. So I need a second and a roll call vote. The motion is seconded by
Me.
Mr. Waldron. Having a second, we'll now have a roll call vote. Mr. Durensis.
Aye.
Mr. Yan.
Aye.
Mr. Waldron.
Aye.
Mr. Johnson.
Aye.
Mr. Morrill votes aye. Having passed by a vote of 5-0, the open session is now closed and we will not be returning to open session. We are now in executive session.